3 years ago, something happened to me in northern Colorado that I'll never forget. My name is David Cole, and at the time I was 55. I had just retired after 3 decades working for the railroad. After years of dealing with constant noise, deadlines, and city chaos, I wanted peace. So I bought a small wooden cabin tucked deep inside the Roosevelt National Forest, far from the nearest town. The cabin wasn't fancy, just a wood stove, a small kitchen, and a wraparound porch. But to me, it felt like heaven. It was just me and my Labrador, Shadow. For the first few months, life was perfect. Cool mornings with fog curling through the pines, quiet evenings with a fire crackling in the stove, and the sound of owls echoing through the valley at night. But all that changed one October. It started one warm evening. I was sitting in my recliner with a cup of coffee when Shadow suddenly stiffened by the door, ears up, growling low. I muted the TV, listening hard. At first, all I heard was wind in the trees. Then faintly, footsteps, slow, deliberate. I went out on the porch with a flashlight, but the yard was empty. Still, Shadow wouldn't calm down the entire night, pacing and whining. By the next morning, I'd convinced myself it was probably just deer, but deep down, something didn't sit right. The next night, the same thing happened, footsteps circling the cabin. By the third night, I found something that made my stomach drop. A path in the tall grass behind the cabin, worn flat as if someone had been walking back and forth, over and over. Scattered along that path were cigarette butts, fresh ones, and in a muddy patch near the tree line, I found the impression of a boot print, maybe size 10 or 11. I hadn't had a neighbor within a mile. Whoever was out there didn't just wander onto my property. They were watching me. That evening, Shadow refused to settle. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of footsteps again. This time, they weren't behind the cabin. They were on the porch. I held my breath as each wooden step groaned under the weight of someone climbing. Shadow's growl turned into a low snarl. Whoever it was paused right at the front door, then walked slowly toward the side of the cabin. I should have seen them. The motion sensor lights should have gone off, but they didn't. Later, I realized why. The wires had been cut. That was the moment I knew this wasn't some hunter or hiker passing through. This was deliberate. The following morning, I forced myself to search the perimeter, and that's when I found them. Wires strung low between 2 trees, stretched tight across the path leading from my back door. They weren't hunting snares, they were trip wires. If I had walked out in the dark like I usually did with Shadow, I would have gone down hard, maybe right onto the jagged ends of the cut metal. My hands shook as I clipped them down and shoved the wires into a bag. Whoever was stalking me wasn't just creeping around. They wanted to hurt me. I drove straight into town and showed the sheriff's office the photos I'd taken. At first, the deputy looked skeptical, asking if I'd been drinking or if I had enemies. But when I showed him the wires, his face changed. He admitted he'd never seen anything like it in 20 years on the job. He promised to have patrols check the area, but I could tell he didn't believe this was more than some sick prank. But I knew better. I spent the next week installing trail cams, new motion lights, and heavy locks on every door. For a few days it worked. No footsteps, no shadows. I almost started to relax. Then, at 2 a.m. one night, every single floodlight blazed to life at once. I grabbed my pistol and ran to the window, heart pounding. But there was nothing except my cameras, smashed. Every single one of them, crushed to pieces. Whoever it was had known exactly where each one was. They'd been watching me install them. One camera survived, a trail cam I'd hidden high in a pine tree. The next morning I checked the footage. The video showed a tall figure in dark clothing, a ski mask covering their face, carrying a sledgehammer. They moved methodically from camera to camera, and just before they destroyed the last one, they turned directly toward the lens. and waved. That was it. I packed my belongings, planning to leave the cabin within 2 days. But my last night there was the worst of all. Around midnight, Shadow froze, staring at the tree line. Then came the sound I'd grown to dread. Footsteps. Only this time, there was more than one set. 2, 3, maybe more. Slow, deliberate, surrounding the cabin. I stepped out onto the porch with my pistol raised and shouted, "This is private property. You need to leave right now." The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. Then, from the edge of the woods, I saw them, glints of eyes reflecting in the moonlight. Not one pair, several, watching, waiting. I shouted again, my voice cracking. "I'm leaving tomorrow. You can have this damn place, but you're not coming inside." The eyes lingered for a few moments, then slowly disappeared into the darkness. The forest went silent again. By sunrise, I was gone. I sold the cabin months later to a young couple from Denver. As far as I know, they never had any problems. But sometimes I wonder, were they really just people? Or was something else out there in those woods, waiting for the right kind of prey? All I know is this: the footsteps I heard in those trees, they still follow me in my dreams. That fall, my best friend Jordan and I were driving cross-country through New Mexico. The plan was simple: hit a few national parks, spend a couple of nights in Albuquerque, and then keep heading west. We were 19, restless, and thought the open road would give us some kind of freedom we hadn't found back home. But freedom has a way of twisting when the road runs too long. It was past midnight on the third day. The highway stretched like an endless ribbon of black, and we hadn't seen another set of headlights for at least an hour. Jordan kept the music low, his fingers tapping the steering wheel, but I could tell he was fighting sleep. I offered to take the wheel, but he shook his head. He hated being a passenger. When we finally saw a flicker of neon in the distance, it felt almost like a mirage. A sign buzzed faintly against the night sky: Moonlight Inn. The letters were cracked and burned out in places, leaving only half the words glowing. The building behind it was a long, low structure with chipped paint and a gravel lot that looked abandoned. Jordan slowed the car, hesitated, then turned in. The lot was empty except for a single rusted pickup truck near the edge. The place looked like it hadn't seen guests in years, but we were too tired to care. A night in a sketchy motel was better than falling asleep at the wheel. Inside, the lobby smelled of mildew and dust. A single lamp buzzed on the counter, and behind it stood a man. He was tall, thin, with grayish skin and eyes that didn't seem to focus when he looked at us. Without a smile, without a word of welcome, he slid a brass key across the desk. "Room 6, end of the hall," he said. His voice was flat, low, and carried no warmth. That was it. No paperwork, no ID check, just the key. The hallway stretched long and dim, lit by a row of flickering bulbs that swung faintly as though stirred by a draft. The carpet was stained and soft under our shoes, the kind of soft that comes from years of rot, not comfort. Each door we passed was marked with scratches around the handle, long grooves etched deep into the wood. Room 6 was at the very end. The door creaked as Jordan shoved it open. The room was small, a single bed with a faded floral spread, a cracked mirror on the wall, and a lamp that buzzed like a dying insect. The wallpaper peeled in strips, revealing the plaster beneath. "Perfect," Jordan muttered. He threw his backpack down and flopped onto the bed. I didn't answer. Something about the room felt heavy, not just old, heavy, like the air carried memories that pressed against your chest. Still, exhaustion won. We shut off the light and let the silence settle. It must have been close to 2 a.m. when I woke. At first, I thought it was a dream, the sound of footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate. Then a knock. 3 sharp raps, not on our door, on the one across from us. I held my breath. The footsteps came again, another knock, this time closer. Jordan stirred. "What the hell?" he whispered. We listened. The hall was silent again. But just as I started to close my eyes, our doorknob rattled. Someone was trying to get in. I sat up, heart hammering, while Jordan grabbed the chair from the corner and wedged it under the knob. Whoever it was didn't push hard, just twisted and twisted, slow and steady, like they had all the time in the world. Then, scratching. Long, deliberate scratches across the wood. We didn't sleep after that. We just sat in silence, waiting for dawn. When the first light crept through the curtains, we packed fast and left the room as if it were on fire. At the front desk, the man from last night was gone. In his place stood an older woman, hair tied back, her uniform faded with age. She smiled faintly, like we were the first real guests she'd seen in a while. "Hope you boys slept all right," she said. I tried to keep my voice steady. The night clerk, tall guy, pale skin, he gave us the key. Her expression faltered. "Sir, there hasn't been a night clerk here in over 20 years." Jordan and I exchanged a look, but neither of us spoke. We just dropped the key on the counter and walked out. We didn't stop driving until we hit Albuquerque. A week later, back home, I couldn't get the place out of my head. Something about those scratches on the doors, the man's hollow eyes, the sound of footsteps, none of it left me. I searched the name, Moonlight Inn, New Mexico. The first article that came up chilled me to the bone. In 1998, the motel had been the site of a brutal crime. A drifter was accused of dragging families out of their rooms in the middle of the night. Every door had scratches near the handles, desperate marks from people trying to claw their way free. The suspect vanished before trial. Some say he died on the road. Others claimed he never left. The victims, they all died in room 6. And the photo of the accused man, grainy and faded in the article, it was him, the man behind the counter, the same lifeless stare, the same hollow face. I closed my laptop and tried to tell myself it was just exhaustion, just coincidence. But deep down I knew the truth. That motel wasn't abandoned, not really. Some doors never close, some halls never empty, and some clerks never stopped checking people in. It was supposed to be nothing more than a quick road trip. David Miller, a mechanical engineer from Denver, had promised his daughter Emma a weekend getaway. Just the two of them, father and daughter, something simple to make up for all the time work had stolen from him. Emma had just turned 14, and lately she'd become more distant, more wrapped up in her phone, her friends, and the strange new world of high school drama. "Dad," she had sighed that morning, brushing her long brown hair into a ponytail. "Do we have to drive all the way through the mountains?" "I'll lose service before we're even halfway," David had only laughed. "That's the point, Em. No service, no distractions, just us." Emma had rolled her eyes but climbed into the passenger seat of his aging SUV, clutching her phone like a lifeline. She had no idea this trip would change both of their lives forever. They were supposed to be heading toward a popular camping ground near Silverton, but a wrong turn off a narrow mountain road led them deeper into unfamiliar territory. By the time David realized they'd gone off course, the gas gauge was dipping dangerously close to empty. "Relax," he told Emma, who was staring nervously at the endless pines surrounding them. "There's bound to be a town nearby. We'll fuel up, grab a bite, and get back on track." And sure enough, just as twilight began to fall, they spotted a weather-beaten wooden sign by the roadside. "Welcome to Hollow Creek. EST, 1890. Pop." 1132. The letters were faded, the paint peeling, but it was a town nonetheless. Relief washed over David as he drove past the sign and onto Main Street. But Emma frowned. "Dad, why does this place look like it's stuck in the 80s? She wasn't wrong. The storefronts lining the street had old hand-painted signs, neon lights buzzing faintly in windows. A diner advertised burgers 99 cents in a style that looked like it hadn't changed in decades. A gas station stood at the far end of town, but even from a distance, David noticed the pumps were the kind with rolling dials, not digital screens. Something about it felt off, like they'd stepped backward in time. David pulled into the gas station. An older man in overalls shuffled out, wiping his hands on a rag. His smile was thin and didn't quite reach his eyes. "Evening, stranger. You looking to fill up?" "Yeah, if you've got regular unleaded," David said, climbing out. "We kinda lost our way." "Is there a quicker route back to the highway?" The man's smile twitched. "Highway?" He glanced toward the darkening woods. "Ain't no highway round here. You must have come awful far." Emma leaned out of the SUV window. "Hey, mister, is there any Wi-Fi here? Or like a cell tower?" The man's expression darkened. "No towers here, missy." "Ain't never needed 'em," David laughed awkwardly, but unease began to coil in his stomach. The man's words didn't just sound old-fashioned. They sounded out of place, like someone speaking from another time. With no highway nearby and the gas pumps working slower than molasses, David decided they should stay the night. A small roadside motel with a flickering vacancy sign sat across from the diner. The owner, Mrs. Harlow, was a frail woman with sharp eyes and an unsettling smile. "2 beds?" she asked, sliding a brass key across the counter. "You'll be safe here, long as you don't wander after dark." David chuckled. "Safe? This isn't exactly crime central, is it?" Mrs. Harlow's gaze lingered on him a moment too long. "Not from the living," she muttered, almost too softly to hear. Emma stiffened. "Dad, did you hear?" But David cut her off with a smile. "Come on, Em. She's just eccentric." Still, when they entered their room, Emma refused to sleep near the window. It started around midnight. At first, David thought it was the wind, but soon he realized the sound outside wasn't natural. Whispers, dozens of them, maybe more, drifting on the air. They weren't clear, but they seemed to be circling the motel, rising and falling like a chant. Emma sat bolt upright in bed. "Dad, someone's outside." David held his breath, straining to listen. The whispers grew louder, then fell silent all at once, leaving only the sound of his own pounding heartbeat. He crept to the window and pulled the curtain back just enough to peek. The street below was empty, too empty. The diner, the gas station, every shop, dark, not a single light in town. But there were footprints in the dirt road, bare footprints, hundreds of them. The next morning, David stormed into the sheriff's office, demanding answers. Sheriff Grant was a tall, broad man with pale eyes and a calm voice. "You must have been dreaming," the sheriff said smoothly when David described the whispers. "This town's as quiet as they come." "No one out there last night," Emma interrupted. "That's not true. We both heard them." The sheriff's gaze shifted to her, and for the briefest moment, his calm expression cracked. Something sharp flashed behind his eyes, fear maybe, or anger. "You'd best keep your daughter inside after dark," he said flatly. "Some things out there ain't meant for the living to see." That night, Emma refused to sleep. She kept recording on her phone, even though there was no service, muttering that she'd upload it later. Around 2 a.m., the whispers returned. But this time there was something else, a slow, dragging sound against the motel walls. Emma gripped her father's arm. "They're looking for us." David grabbed the brass key from the nightstand. It was old, worn, and cold to the touch, and then he noticed something carved into it. Hollow Creek, 1985. Confusion surged through him. Why would the motel keys have a date from 40 years ago? Unless this entire town had been frozen in time. By dawn, David had made up his mind. They were leaving, gas or no gas. He shook Emma awake, and together they loaded the SUV. But when he drove toward the edge of town, the road curved back in on itself. No matter which way he turned, they ended up back on Main Street. The same diner, the same gas station, the same crooked sign. Emma began to cry. "Dad, we're trapped." And that's when Mrs. Harlow appeared beside the SUV, her frail figure blocking the road. Her eyes glowed faintly in the morning light. "You shouldn't have come here," she whispered. "Hollow Creek only appears every 30 years, and once you enter, it doesn't let you leave." David floored the gas pedal, swerving past her, but when he glanced in the rearview mirror, she was gone. After what felt like hours, the road finally opened into sunlight. A green sign read, "Welcome to Silverton, population 6,400. Relief crashed over David and Emma. They were out, or so they thought. That night, back home in Denver, Emma uploaded the footage from her phone. But when they played it back, their blood ran cold. The video showed the motel room, the empty streets. But in every frame, shadowy figures crowded the background. Dozens of them standing silently, watching. Figures neither of them had seen in person. And in the very last clip, recorded as they drove out of Hollow Creek, a reflection appeared in the SUV's back window. Mrs. Harlow, sitting in the back seat, smiling.